I remember the exact moment my marriage changed. Not with a fight, not with shouting, not even with tears, but with a sentence so quiet it almost slipped past me. "You're not invited." That's what Daniel said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, one hand still resting on the frame, like he hadn't fully decided whether to come in or leave. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't apologetic either. It was flat, practiced, as if he had already said it once before, just not to me. I looked up from the suitcase sitting open on the bed, half packed with the dresses I had carefully chosen the night before. Soft fabrics, nothing too bold. His mother didn't like bold. I had learned that early. "I'm sorry?" I asked, thinking I must have misunderstood. He exhaled, slow and controlled, like I was the one making this difficult. "The dinner. This weekend. Mom thinks it's better if it's just immediate family." I stared at him, waiting for the rest, waiting for the correction, the smile, the "of course I don't mean you." But it didn't come. "I am your immediate family," I said quietly. His jaw tightened, just slightly. "You know what I mean." No, I didn't. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to accept it. On the bed beside me sat the navy blue dress I had bought specifically for this dinner, a reservation at that expensive restaurant she loved. The one where the waiters spoke in hushed tones and everything came in portions too small to fill you but too expensive to question. I had spent 3 days deciding what to wear. I had spent 3 years trying to belong. "And since when," I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, "does your mother decide whether your wife is invited?" He ran a hand through his hair, already irritated now, already tired of a conversation I hadn't even begun. "Don't do this," he said. "It's just one dinner. Just one dinner." It's funny how something so small can carry the weight of everything that came before it. Because it wasn't just one dinner. It was every holiday where I was seated at the far end of the table, close enough to pass the salt, but too far to be part of the conversation. It was every photo where his mother would say, "Let's get one with just family," and I would step back before anyone had to ask. It was the way she introduced me to her friends. "This is Daniel's wife," like my name was optional, like I was temporary. It was the way Daniel never corrected her, not once. "I already told her you wouldn't come," he added, glancing at his phone, like there was something more important waiting for him there. That part landed differently. "You already told her?" I repeated. "Yeah, it's easier this way." "Easier? For who?" I looked down at the suitcase again, at the careful folds, the effort, the quiet hope stitched into every decision I had made. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. "I'm telling you now." The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had inched closer without warning. "You told your mother before you told me." Just shifted his weight, like he was preparing to leave. "Look," he said, softening his tone just enough to sound reasonable. "She's been stressed. She wants things a certain way. It's her birthday. And I'm your wife." The words hung there heavier than I intended, but still not heavy enough to matter. "I don't want to argue about this," he said. "It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." That phrase again, always that phrase. I closed the suitcase slowly, pressing down on the lid until the zipper met in the middle with a soft, final sound. "Okay," I said. He blinked, surprised. "Okay?" "Yeah," I replied, standing up. "It's not a big deal, right?" Something in my voice must have shifted, because he studied me for a second longer than usual, like he was trying to read something that wasn't there before. "Exactly," he said, relieved. "Thank you for understanding." Understanding. That was the word he chose. Not agreeing, not accepting, understanding, as if I had been given a lesson, and my role was simply to learn it. He left the room a moment later, already moving on, already done. I didn't follow. I stood there in the quiet, staring at the closed suitcase, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself replay everything without softening the edges. The first time I met his mother, she had smiled at me without showing her teeth. "Daniel has always been very particular," she said, her eyes scanning me like a checklist. "He doesn't like complications." I had laughed then, nervous, eager to be liked. "I'm not complicated. We'll see." At the time, I thought it was a joke. Now I realized it was a warning. There had been other moments, too many to count, but small enough to dismiss on their own. A comment about my cooking. It's different. A pause before including me in plans. Oh, I didn't think you'd want to come. A look exchanged between her and Daniel that I was never meant to understand. And every time I told myself the same thing. It's not a big deal. But standing there, in that quiet room, with a suitcase I no longer needed, and an invitation that had never really been mine, something settled inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clarity. Because this wasn't about a dinner. This was about a decision that had already been made, long before tonight. A decision about where I stood. Or rather, where I didn't. And the worst part wasn't that his mother didn't want me there. It was that my husband agreed. I didn't cry that night. That was the first thing that felt unfamiliar. There was a time not so long ago when something like this would have unraveled me. I would have sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, typing and deleting messages to Daniel, trying to explain why it hurt, why it mattered, why I mattered. I would have rehearsed conversations in my head where he finally understood, where he chose me. But that night I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't pace. I didn't even sit down. Instead, I opened the suitcase again. Not to finish packing, to undo it. One dress at a time, I lifted the fabric, smoothed it out, and placed it back into the closet. The one I had spent the most time choosing. The one I thought might finally earn me a nod of approval, or at least silence instead of critique. I hung it carefully, adjusting the hanger so it faced the same direction as the others. Order had always calmed me. Even now, it helped. Because if I focused on small, controlled movements, I didn't have to think about the larger truth pressing in around me. That I had just been uninvited from my own life. When I finished, I closed the closet door and stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the mirror beside it. I looked the same. No visible crack. No sign that anything had shifted. And yet everything had. Downstairs, I could hear Daniel moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of a glass, the low hum of the coffee machine he always set up for the morning. Routine. That was his strength. And I was beginning to realize his escape. I walked down slowly, each step measured, each breath even. He glanced up when I entered, like nothing had happened. "Do you want tea?" he asked. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Can we talk?" Just tea. "No," I said. He nodded like that settled it, and turned back to what he was doing. For a moment I watched him. This man I had built a life with. This man who once stayed up all night with me when I had the flu, who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sundays, who used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. That version of him felt distant now. Not gone, just quiet, buried under something heavier. "Daniel," I said. He sighed before I could even continue, like my voice alone was already too much. "What?" he asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. I chose my words carefully. "Has she ever liked me?" He paused, just for a second, but it was enough. "That's not fair," he said. It wasn't an answer. I didn't ask if it was fair, I replied. I asked if she likes me. He set the mug down slower this time. "She doesn't know you like I do." I almost smiled at that. 3 years, I said. She's had 3 years. She's just protective. Of you? Yes. And I'm what, a threat? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. He turned then, finally facing me fully. "You're twisting this." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "I'm finally seeing it." That word again. Seeing. Clarity has a strange way of making everything else feel sharper. Every memory, every moment I once dismissed, suddenly rearranged itself into something undeniable. "You could have said no," I continued. "You could have told her I'm coming, that I'm your wife." It wasn't worth the fight. There it was, simple, honest, final. I let that settle between us. Not worth the fight, not worth defending, not worth choosing. "Okay," I said again, softer this time. And I meant it differently now. He studied me, a flicker of something uncertain crossing his face. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I understand," I said. But this time the word wasn't for him. It was for me. Because understanding doesn't always lead to acceptance. Sometimes it leads to distance. The next 2 days passed quietly. Too quietly. Daniel acted as if everything was normal. He talked about work, about traffic, about a new place that opened downtown. He avoided anything that might circle back to Friday night, to the dinner, to the absence that would be mine, and I let him. Not because I had forgiven anything, but because I was watching, listening, not for what he said, but for what he didn't. No apology, no hesitation, no reconsideration, just certainty. On Thursday evening, the night before the dinner, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. "Do you think this is too much?" he asked, glancing at me. I looked at him, really looked this time, at how carefully he had chosen his shirt, how he smoothed the fabric like it mattered. It did matter, just not to me. "It's perfect," I said. He smiled slightly, satisfied. "Mom likes this color," he added. "Of course she did." I nodded, saying nothing. He hesitated then, just briefly. "You're sure you're okay?" he asked. It was the first time he had come close to asking, but even now, it felt like an afterthought. "I'm fine," I said. And again, I meant it differently. Because fine doesn't always mean unhurt. Sometimes it means finished. That night, after he fell asleep, I stayed awake. Not restless, not anxious, just aware. I thought about the version of me who would have begged to be included, who would have shown up anyway, hoping presence alone might earn belonging. That version of me felt distant now, like someone I used to know. Around midnight, I got out of bed and walked into the living room. The house was still. Peaceful, even. I sat on the couch and let the silence stretch. And then, slowly, I reached for my phone, not to call Daniel, not to message his mother, but to open something else, our joint account. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering just above it. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about something much deeper. Access, control, investment. All the invisible threads that tie two people together and quietly define who holds the power. I scrolled through the transactions. Rent, groceries, utilities, gifts. Gifts for his mother. Expensive ones. Chosen by me. Paid from us. A small, almost imperceptible shift happened inside me then. Another piece falling into place. Because exclusion doesn't always come with loud rejection. Sometimes it comes with quiet expectation. Be there when we need you. Disappear when we don't. I locked the phone and set it down beside me. Tomorrow night, they would sit at that table. They would laugh, toast, celebrate, and I would not be there. Not because I couldn't be, but because I was not wanted. And for the first time, I stopped asking how to change that, and started asking something else entirely. What happens when I stop trying? Friday arrived without ceremony. No tension, no confrontation, no last-minute change of heart. Just a quiet morning that felt almost too ordinary for what it carried. Daniel left early for work, dressed sharper than usual, his energy slightly elevated in a way he didn't seem to notice. Before he walked out the door, he paused, like he might say something more. He didn't. "Don't wait up," he said instead. "It might run late." "I won't," I replied. And that was that. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and just like that, I was alone. But not in the way I used to feel alone. This felt different. Cleaner. Like something had already ended, and the silence was just catching up to it. I moved through the day slowly, deliberately. I cleaned the kitchen, even though it didn't need it. I watered the plants. I folded laundry that could have waited, the kind that keep your hands busy, so your mind doesn't wander too far ahead. But eventually, it did. Around noon, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, again. I don't know what I expected to see. Someone different, maybe. Someone who looked like she had finally understood her place. Instead, I saw the same woman. But now I recognized something I hadn't before. Not weakness. Not desperation. Patience. And beneath it, something steadier. self-respect. I turned away from the mirror and walked to the closet. For a moment I just stood there, my hand resting on the handle. Then I opened it. The navy blue dress was still there, exactly where I had placed it. Carefully chosen, carefully rejected. I reached for it, hesitated for half a second, and then took it down. Not for them. Not anymore. For me. I changed slowly, smoothing the fabric over my skin, adjusting the fit, brushing my hair with more attention than usual. There was no rush, no pressure, no need to impress anyone, and somehow that made it matter more. When I was done, I looked at myself again. This time I didn't search for approval. I just observed. And what I saw was enough. By early evening, the sun had started to dip, casting that soft golden light through the windows. The same kind of light I had imagined walking into that restaurant. The same light that would now fall on a table where I did not exist. I picked up my phone. Not to check on Daniel, not to imagine what they were doing, but to make a reservation. A small place downtown. Elegant in a way that didn't need to announce itself. A table for one. Of course, the hostess said warmly. What time? 7, I replied. The same time their dinner would begin. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits. The restaurant was softly lit, the air filled with low conversation, and the faint sound of music that didn't intrude. The hostess smiled as she led me to my table. Right this way. No hesitation, no question, no one asking if I belonged there. I sat down, placing my hands lightly on the table, taking in the space around me. It felt easy. A waiter approached, offering water, then a menu. Take your time, he said. I almost laughed at that. Take your time. As if time had ever been something I was allowed to have without earning it first. I ordered slowly. Not because I was unsure, but because I could be. An appetizer, a main course, a glass of wine. Things I would have skipped before. Things I would have justified as unnecessary. Tonight nothing needed justification. As I waited, I let my mind drift. Not to Daniel, not to his mother, not to the dinner happening across the city, but to something quieter. All the moments I had made myself smaller. All the times I had adjusted, softened, stepped back. Not because I was asked directly, but because it felt expected. Because somewhere along the way, I had learned that belonging often came at the cost of shrinking. The food arrived, plated beautifully, almost too carefully. I took my first bite slowly. It tasted good. Not just the food, the moment, the absence of tension. No one watching, no one judging. No one measuring my words, my posture, my presence. Just me. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Daniel. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then I picked it up. Hey, I said calmly. His voice came through, slightly muffled, like he had stepped away from noise. Hey, just checking in. Checking in. Now, I'm fine, I said. A pause. Where are you, he asked. At dinner. Another pause, longer this time. Dinner? He repeated. Yes. With who? I took a sip of my wine before answering. Myself. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that searches for footing and finds none. Oh, he said finally. I could almost picture his expression. Slightly unsettled. Good. How is it? I asked. What? The dinner. He hesitated. It's fine, he said. Fine. I smiled faintly. Good, I replied. Another pause. Then, Mom asked about you. Of course she did. And suddenly I understood something else. Not all questions are invitations. Some are performances. What did you say? I asked. That you weren't feeling well. I let that sit for a moment. A small lie. A convenient one. I see, I said. You could have come, you know, he added quickly, if you really wanted to. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I wasn't invited, I said simply. That's not. It's okay, I cut in gently. It's not a big deal. His words, given back to him. There was a shift on the other end of the line then. Subtle, but real. Are you upset? He asked. No, I said. And for the first time, it was completely true. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had already moved past the point where his answer could fix anything. I should get back, he said. Of course. Drive safe, he added. I will. The call ended. I placed the phone back on the table and looked around. Nothing had changed. The same soft lighting, the same quiet hum, the same sense of ease. But inside me, something had settled into place. Not anger, not even sadness, just certainty. Because while they were sitting at a table where I had been excluded, I was sitting at one where I had finally chosen myself. I didn't rush home after dinner. That would have been the old instinct. Finish quickly, return quickly, be available. Instead, I lingered. I ordered dessert, not because I was still hungry, but because I wanted to understand what it felt like to stay somewhere without needing a reason. The waiter didn't question it. He simply nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe I had just spent years convincing myself it wasn't. By the time I stepped outside, the air had cooled, the kind of soft evening that wraps around you instead of pressing in.
The city moved at its usual pace. Cars passing, people talking, lives unfolding without awareness of mine.
And for once, that didn't make me feel small. It made me feel separate, free. When I got home, the house was still empty. Daniel's shoes were gone from the entryway, his jacket missing from the hook. A quiet confirmation that he was still there, still seated at that table, still participating in a version of family that did not include me. I slipped off my heels and walked inside, not bothering to turn on all the lights. The dimness felt appropriate, not sad, just honest. I sat down on the couch, the same spot I had been in the night before. But I wasn't the same woman sitting there now. Then, almost absently, I reached for my phone again. Not out of habit, out of intention. I opened our messages, scrolled up, past casual check-ins, reminders, and then further, to older conversations, softer ones, ones filled with things like, I miss you and can't wait to see you. I paused there for a moment, not to dwell, just to acknowledge. We hadn't always been like this. That mattered. But it didn't change what we had become. At 10:12 p.m., I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in, quieter than usual, like he wasn't sure what he was walking back into. He spotted me on the couch and paused. You're still up, he said. I live here, I replied calmly. He nodded, setting his keys down more carefully than necessary. How was dinner? He asked. It was good. What did you have? I could have given him the full answer, described every detail. But that wasn't the point. Something I liked, I said. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to place something that had shifted just out of reach. That's good, he said. A beat passed. Then another. Finally, he moved closer, stopping just a few feet away. Mom said it was a shame you couldn't make it, he added. I looked at him, not sharply, just directly. Did she? I asked. Yeah. And did she say why I wasn't there? He hesitated. No. Of course she didn't. Because in her version of the story, there was nothing to explain. I nodded slightly, letting that settle.
Together soon, he continued, a little too quickly. You know, make up for it. Make up for it. As if exclusion could be rescheduled, as if respect could be postponed and then casually restored. That won't be necessary, I said. He blinked. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not interested in making up for something that was intentional. It wasn't intentional, he said immediately. You're taking it too personally. I almost smiled at that. Too personally. As if there were a more appropriate way to take being excluded from your own marriage. She didn't want me there, I said, and you agreed. That's not. It is, I said, still calm. And that's okay. That's okay, he repeated, clearly thrown now. Yes. Because it was. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had stopped expecting it to be different. That doesn't make any sense, he said, frustration starting to edge into his voice. If you're okay with it, then why does this feel like a problem? There it was, the confusion,
Because in his mind, discomfort only existed if it was expressed loudly, if it disrupted, if it demanded. But quiet change? That was harder to recognize. It feels like a problem, I said slowly, because something changed tonight. He frowned slightly. What changed? I held his gaze. I stopped trying to be invited. The words landed softly, but their weight was undeniable. That's dramatic, he said, though there was less confidence behind it now. It's accurate. A long silence followed, not empty, full of everything we weren't saying. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair again. I think you're overreacting, he said. And there it was, the final piece, dismissal. Not new, but clearer now. I think, I said gently, you're underreacting. He looked at me, really looked this time, and for a brief moment I saw it, the flicker of realization. Not full understanding, but enough to unsettle him. I didn't think it was that serious, he admitted. I know, I said. That's the problem. Another silence. Then quieter this time, he asked, So what are you saying? I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted the words to land exactly as they were meant to. I'm saying, I began, that I've spent a long time trying to fit into a place where I was never fully accepted. He didn't interrupt. Didn't deflect, just listened. And tonight, I continued, I realized I don't actually have to do that. His expression tightened. That sounds like you're giving up. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. It sounds like I'm choosing something else. What? My voice didn't waver. Myself. That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because for the first time I wasn't asking him to understand. I wasn't asking him to agree. I wasn't even asking him to change. I was simply telling the truth, and the truth didn't need permission. Daniel didn't argue after that, not right away. He stood there, caught between wanting to respond and not knowing how. Like the version of me he understood had just stepped out of frame and left someone unfamiliar in her place. I think you're tired, he said finally, quieter now. We should talk about this tomorrow. Tomorrow. Another delay. Another quiet push forward, as if time could soften what had already settled. We can, I said, but not because I needed the conversation. Because I didn't. That night I slept easily. No replaying conversations. No rewriting outcomes. Just sleep. And in the morning, something unexpected happened. I didn't wait for him. I got up early, got dressed, and left the house before Daniel came downstairs. Not out of avoidance, out of intention. The air outside felt different, or maybe I did. I walked without rushing, letting the quiet of the morning settle around me like something I had finally earned. I ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away, the kind of place I had passed 100 times but never entered because there was always somewhere else to be, someone else to prioritize. Inside, it was warm, softly lit, filled with the low hum of people who worked trying to be anything other than present. Sat by the window. And for a while, I did nothing. No phone, no planning, no adjusting. Just existed. It sounds simple. It wasn't. Because when you've spent years measuring your worth by how well you're received, how smoothly you fit into other people's expectations, learning to sit without performing feels almost unfamiliar. But not uncomfortable, just new. My phone buzzed once on the table. Daniel. I looked at the screen. Let it ring, then stop. A moment later, a message came through. Where are you? I didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, I took a sip of my coffee and watched the light shift across the floor. For once, I let someone else wait. By the time I returned home, it was late morning. Daniel was in the kitchen, exactly where I expected him to be. He looked up the second I walked in. Where were you? He asked. His tone wasn't angry, it was unsettled. I went out, I said simply. You didn't say anything. I didn't think I needed to. That landed. Not harsh, just different. He studied me again, like he had the night before, still trying to understand what had changed and why he hadn't seen it coming. Are you still upset? He asked. No, I said. And again, it was true. I just see things clearly now.
That doesn't sound good, he admitted. It depends on how you look at it. A pause. Then more carefully, and how do you look at it? I set my keys down on the counter, taking a moment before answering. I think I spent a long time confusing patience with acceptance, I said. And they're not the same. He frowned slightly. I never asked you to accept anything. No, I agreed. You just never asked me not to. That silence returned again. But this time, it felt different. Less uncertain. More revealing. I didn't realize you felt this way, he said. I know. Because he hadn't been looking. Not really. And now, he asked. Now. Such a simple word for something that carries so much weight. Now, I said, I'm not going to keep putting myself in spaces where I'm tolerated at best and unwanted at worst. That's not fair, he said, though it sounded weaker this time. You are wanted. By you? I asked. He hesitated. Too long. And that was answer enough. I'm your wife, I continued, not raising my voice, not pushing, just stating something that should have always been obvious. I shouldn't have to compete for a place in your life. You're not competing, he said quickly. Then why did I lose? The question sat between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because there wasn't an answer that didn't lead somewhere uncomfortable. I didn't think it would come to this, he said finally. It didn't, I replied. It was always here. That was the part he didn't want to see. Because this wasn't about one dinner. It was about a pattern. A quiet erosion. A series of small moments that on their own could be dismissed, but together told a very clear story. And what happens now? He asked. There was something almost careful in the way he said it, like he already knew the answer might not be one he liked. I met his gaze, and for the first time I didn't soften what I was about to say. Now, I said, I stopped showing up where I'm not respected. And what does that mean for us? It was the first honest question he had asked, and maybe the most important. It means, I said slowly, that things don't continue the way they have been. He looked at me, searching. For better or worse? I held his gaze. That depends on whether anything actually changes. Another silence. But this one wasn't empty. It was a crossroads. Because for the first time, the responsibility wasn't quietly resting on me to adjust, to fix, to smooth things over. It was his, and he knew it. I need time to think, he said. Take it. Because I already had. And I wasn't waiting anymore. That afternoon, I went back to the closet. The navy blue dress was still hanging there. But it didn't feel like a symbol of rejection anymore. Just fabric. Just something I had once chosen for the wrong reasons. I took it down, folded it, placed it gently into a donation box. Not out of anger, not out of sadness, but out of understanding, because I didn't need it anymore. Not to impress, not to belong, not to be accepted. I closed the box and set it by the door, and as I stood there, in the quiet of a home that suddenly felt more honest than it had in years, I realized something simple. I hadn't lost my place. I had just stopped accepting the one they gave me. And in doing that, I had finally made space for something better. Something chosen, something real.